Most people who say they want to start a YouTube channel never actually do it. Not because they can't, but because they keep waiting for the perfect moment. If you're thinking about starting a YouTube channel, there's a chance that you've spent a lot of time thinking about how it should look. You imagine the camera and lighting setup you'll use, you imagine the kind of niche videos you want to make. And sometimes that imagination goes even further. You picture what the background will look like, what the thumbnails might look like, or even what the finished channel could become one day. And at some point, you tell yourself that you will start once everything is ready. Maybe once you feel more confident on camera. I mean, come on, guys, we've all said that before. Confidence is one of those things that feels like it should come first, but most of the time it actually shows up much later in the process. The problem is that any of those moments almost never arrive. Most people who start creating stay in that stage for months or even years. They watch videos about making videos, they save gear they want to buy, and they plan ideas in their heads. But they never actually begin to post. It becomes a loop of preparation that feels productive even though nothing is actually being published. Starting feels like a big step. It feels like the moment where everything suddenly becomes serious. But the truth is much simpler than that. The first videos you make are not supposed to be great. They are supposed to exist. That first upload is really just the beginning of a learning process. For example, every creator you've ever watched had a first video. And if you go back and look at those early uploads from people like Casey Neistat or Peter McKinnon, you'll notice something interesting. The videos are not polished in the way their current work is. The lighting is simpler and the pacing feels rougher and the storytelling is still figuring itself out. And that makes it sense because those creators were at the very beginning of learning how their videos should look and should feel. They were learning while they were doing it. That is the part people often miss when they compare themselves to creators who have been making videos for years and years. They see the finished result and assume they need to reach that level before they can even begin. But that level only comes after a long process of making things. Progress on YouTube usually looks much slower and less dramatic than people expect. There's also another trap that people fall into when they want to start creating, the thought that you need the right equipment first. I've thought this myself, like, gear is nice to have and it would be nice to have a cleaner and full setup. It's easy to convince myself or yourself that better gear will somehow solve the hesitation to start. Gear can definitely help in some situations, but it's rarely the thing that stops someone from starting. Most modern cameras and even phones are more than capable of making good videos. And what actually matters in the beginning is learning how to use what you already have. Even very simple setups can produce good looking videos once you understand the basics. You learn how to place a camera so the shot feels balanced. How to work with light that's already in the room and how to speak clearly without explaining your ideas over and over again. Those are small adjustments that come naturally over time, and none of those skills come from waiting. They come from making videos that are slightly better than the one before. Another thing that holds people back is the idea that the first video has to be important. While yes, the content you want to make is important, it doesn't have to be perfect. People spend weeks trying to think of the right or perfect topic, and they want their first upload to represent them as a creator perfectly. I did this and it drove me quite mad. I felt like it had to be something that people immediately understood and connected with. That kind of pressure can make the process feel much harder than it needs to be. But the first video doesn't need to carry that kind of weight. It just needs to be the beginning, your beginning. Once the first video exists, everything after that becomes easier to approach. When you start creating, something interesting happens again. The process itself begins to teach you things that you could never fully understand just by thinking or planning them. There's also this strange kind of pressure that appears when you treat the first video like a big moment. It makes every decision feel heavier than it really is. Small things begin to feel like problems that need to be solved before you can continue. It kind of snowballs over time, and perfection starts to feel like a requirement instead of a goal. But once you upload a few videos, that pressure kind of fades, and you realize that every video is just another step in a long series of steps. One idea leads to the next, one experiment leads to another, and the channel slowly grows in a direction that becomes clearer over time. If you look at most creators who have built something meaningful online, their progress did not come from waiting for the perfect plan. It came from making things regularly and improving. Consistency usually matters more than any single video. The improvement is usually gradual. You might not notice it from one video to the next, but after a few months, the difference becomes obvious. Looking back is often the easiest way to see how far you've come, and none of that comes from preparation alone. It comes from experience. So if you're thinking about starting a channel, the best thing you can do is remove the idea that everything needs to be ready first. Starting with something simple is often the best way to begin. Your first videos might be simple and an easy edit. The lighting might not be perfect, the camera angle might change over time, and the editing might stay fairly basic for a while. And that's completely fine. Most channels grow through small improvements rather than big steps. What matters is that you begin the process. Each video teaches you something that the previous one didn't. Over time, those small lessons add up and shape the way you create. And instead of trying to imagine the perfect starting point, focus on making the next small step possible. Sometimes the next step is simply pressing record and seeing what happens. The biggest difference between people who talk about starting a YouTube channel and people who actually build one is surprisingly simple. One group keeps waiting, and the other group presses record. If you found this video helpful, consider hitting subscribe to see more content like this. And if you want to see what's in my YouTube setup week to week, check out this video here. And as always, I'll catch you guys later. Testing 1 2 3 4. Testing. And gear excuse. Take 2 or 3. I'm not sure.